The strangeness surrounding the saga of J.P. Miller continues as he now is reportedly linked to the drowning of a man back in 2021. And here's the thing, there are those who still believe that Miller played some kind of role in what ultimately led to Mica's passing. And there are those, some of them, who have expressed this publicly. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. The sun had barely risen over the Market Common neighborhood in South Carolina on September 6, 2021. And that is when Chris Skinner, a quadriplegic Army veteran and motivational speaker, wheeled himself toward the community pool for a morning chess game. Strapped into his powered wheelchair, Skinner reportedly moved through the gate that was held open by a neighbor with his dog trotting alongside him. Surveillance cameras captured the next few minutes, and it was chilling. Apparently, Chris Skinner was around the edge of the pool and suddenly fell in. He submerged, wasn't able to free himself. 40 minutes later, bystanders spotted what they initially thought was a discarded pool toy, but it wasn't. It was Skinner's lifeless body. The coroner's office at the time ruled his death to be an accident. But now, over 3 years later, the case has been reportedly reopened due to what is being called conflicting accounts surrounding this event. And even more bizarre, and this is according to WBTW, the coroner's report indicated apparently an autopsy wasn't performed, nor were witness statements taken. And Chris's case has some very eerie ties to, of all people, Pastor John Paul Miller, a man who has been in the headlines a lot this past year after the death of his wife Mica, also from South Carolina. So why exactly is Mica's husband, John Paul Miller, being dragged into this? Well, according to an affidavit filed by Miller's ex-wife, Alyssa Williams, Chris Skinner may have actually confronted the pastor 2 weeks prior to his death, demanding that Miller stay away from his wife at the time, Susie. And by the way, if you need a refresher on all this, Pastor John Paul Miller was the controversial leader of South Carolina's Solid Rock Church, and he was married to Mica Miller, who passed away in April of last year in what authorities ruled to be a self-inflicted death. Mica had passed away on April 27th, which appeared to be days after she had served Miller with separation papers. But now, Miller was in a previous marriage before he met Mica, and this was to a woman named Alyssa Williams. And according to Alyssa Williams, the two were married for approximately 16 years prior to the divorce in 2016, and Miller went on to marry Mica in 2018. But their marriage was reportedly tumultuous and plagued with allegations of abuse against John Paul Miller, which we've talked about a lot on previous episodes of Sidebar. And while authorities, to be clear, have officially ruled on Mica's cause of death and have confirmed that he was not connected to her death and was nowhere near her when all of this happened, there are those who still believe that Miller played some kind of role in what ultimately led to Mica's passing. And there are those, some of them, who have expressed this publicly. But by the way, Miller's already in some hot legal water. This month, 2 women filed lawsuits accusing him of sexual abuse. Miller has denied the allegations, is countersuing one of those women for defamation. And there's also reportedly an FBI investigation into John Paul Miller, although it's unclear what that investigation is or the status of it. But look, with Skinner's drowning under fresh scrutiny, the FBI situation, multiple lawsuits, this saga is still in the news and in the headlines. But now I want to get back to Alyssa Williams. So she and Miller, they shared children together. They shared joint custody following the divorce. But last year, she filed a motion for the court to grant her sole custody over the children. And this was due to her claims that the marriage between Mica and John Paul was so toxic and bad and allegedly abusive that it was becoming harmful to her children. But then you go back to Chris Skinner, because she also mentioned an alleged affair between John Paul Miller and Susie Skinner that had begun at least in 2021. And according to WBTW, Susie recently confirmed that the two are in a relationship. And even more interestingly is that Skinner, who again was paralyzed from the neck down tragically after a drunk driver hit his car when he was just 20, he had once been a devoted member of Miller's church. But in the months before his death, he reportedly grew disillusioned and was distancing himself. And this is according to his sister, Tamara McDermott. So now, with the claims in Williams' custody filings paired with the investigation being reportedly reopened into the death of Chris Skinner, John Paul Miller may once again find himself under some scrutiny. Now, according to the affidavit from Allison Williams, Miller allegedly had been having an affair with Skinner's wife Susie since at least 2021, a relationship facilitated, according to Williams, through their son's shared soccer activities. In her affidavit, Williams says JP began spending time with his now paramour Susie, who is the mother of one of the boys that plays on our son's soccer team. JP began using our son to facilitate times he could spend with Susie, which our children were well aware of. When I learned JP was exposing our children to yet another one of his adulterous affairs, I confronted JP and Susie and told them not to let it happen again. Now, Williams was no longer married to Miller at the time, but part of her concern was that this alleged relationship was having a negative impact on her children. And I want you to take a look at what she had to say about Chris Skinner's death, because she writes, JP called me the day Susie's husband died in an alleged drowning in accident, extremely upset and asking me to pray, which was incredibly bizarre. By the way, we are doing multiple sidebars a day, so I am so busy. I am always running around, but I'll tell you what, we have this amazing sponsor, Upside, that makes at least buying my daily essentials a treat. How about that? You see, Upside is a free app that gets you cash back when you buy all these things. So I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch at Chipotle, I can use Upside. Maybe I buy something at 7-Eleven, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when I do all these things, right? This is real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you can earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen, and make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR because you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. And then she says is that there was an alleged confrontation between Miller and Skinner before he died. Quote, based upon information and belief, just 2 weeks prior to this incident, Susie's husband had confronted JP and asked him to leave his wife and children alone. It is chilling to know that the spouses of both Susie and JP are now dead from tragic events. Though what is not clear is how exactly she was made aware of that, if it is in fact true. It is worth mentioning that in all of this, that according to reporting from the Daily Mail, actually officiated Skinner's funeral at Solid Rock Church. So from the beginning, Skinner's drowning was deemed accidental, but then the official reports contained what appeared to be puzzling discrepancies. According to WBTW, surveillance footage showed Skinner struggling to lift his head before the motion-activated camera had cut off. No one noticed his body for nearly an hour, and the Horry County Coroner's report, reviewed by the Daily Mail, stated Skinner had, quote, gotten too close to the pool edge, causing his wheelchair to slip in. Yet the police report described a sudden, deliberate movement, stating, quote, Skinner stops at a curve in the pool and then suddenly moves quickly forward and goes into the water. Now, Horry County Chief Deputy Coroner Tamara Willard has reportedly reopened the case, citing new evidence regarding the manner of death. This is according to the Daily Mail. Okay, so now I want to bring on South Carolina attorney Regina Ward, friend of the show, has represented several of the demonstrators outside of John Paul Miller's church, even represented Mica Miller's family at one point in time, Mica at one point in time. Regina, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this latest development. Before we even begin, my understanding is you have been in contact with Chris's sister, Tamara McDermott, and she has a statement, at least partially of a statement that you might be able to share with us. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Tamara McDermott is Chris Skinner's sister, and she had sent me a statement that she would like read. Now, there's a lot of it here. I'm just going to read a part of it that I think is really important to
Great.
the family. And it just says, when Chris passed away on September the 6th of 2021, his death was initially ruled an accident by the coroner. And at the time, my parents and I accepted this explanation provided by Chris's former spouse. And of course, that would be Susie Skinner. However, upon reflection, we realized that neither the police nor Chris's former spouse notified us directly about Chris's passing. Instead, about an hour after Chris was transported to the hospital, we were informed by a neighbor who had been instructed to contact us. So in December of 2024, after reviewing police reports and the coroner's report, then discrepancies became apparent. In December of 2024, also upon examining dash cam footage, they learned for the first time that the pastor of Solid Rock Church had been present at the scene. And she also goes on to say that Micah Francis' passing drew renewed attention to Chris's passing due to the association between those spouses.
So let me amplify this a little bit. Can you confirm that this investigation into Chris's death is officially reopened, and do you know why?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. First of all, there are discrepancies. Some of these things I can't discuss for obvious reasons, but primarily there are, renewed things with regard to additional witnesses that have came forward with statements that would have been relevant at the time of the investigation. As I mentioned in her statement, the dash cam footage also brought to light some things. There is, the discrepancies between the two reports, and also the fact that there wasn't an autopsy done or further investigation. That's something that needed to be looked into definitely further.
Do we have any idea about a timetable when we might get more information from authorities about this?
Yeah, I always wish I could predict those things, but they have certain things that they're looking at, and they're going to take their time and figure out, what's relevant, what's pertinent to the case,
Sure.
and go from there. So I don't have a particular timeline.
You mentioned about John Paul Miller being at the scene. You mean being at the scene of Chris's death?
Yes, that was afterwards that he was actually caught. I'm not sure how he learned of it. I would, presume that maybe Miss Skinner notified him. But both John Paul Miller and Micah showed up there at where the swimming pool was to offer appeared to be, comfort to Miss Skinner. The bizarre thing about that is at the time it appeared that Mr. Miller was having an affair with Miss Skinner, and that's pretty bizarre behavior.
One of the interesting things, and I mentioned this before you came on, and you mentioned it too, the apparent lack of an autopsy, the apparent lack of questioning witnesses. Do we have an explanation about why that was the case?
I don't know. I can't speak for certain why that would be the case, but there's some evidence that's come to light that maybe there was what I would refer to as sort of impeding an investigation. There was pertinent, relevant information that needed to be provided to the police that was not. And had it been, I think they would have approached it differently. But it would be interesting to know if there were any, as far as medications or things that may have been in his system that may have affected him. Looking closer at the footage, definitely interviewing more people and not just taking it on the surface, because there was more there that could have been looked at that could have changed the outcome of what the cause of death was.
Do you have any more context about what actually was said potentially between Chris and John Paul Miller in that conversation, apparently just 2 weeks before Chris died? Do we know what was actually said between the two?
What I understand, there's not a third party that actually witnessed that. I don't know of that at the moment. If there is someone out there like that has that information, definitely needs to come forward. But the conversation was relayed to other family members and other people. So from Chris' perspective, Mr. Skinner's perspective, that conversation happened.
By the way, going back to Chris's sister, Tamara McDermott, are you, if you can tell us, are you representing her? I mean, how did you get in contact with her and the family?
Oh, yes. So I knew Miss McDermott before, and she's actually, she has been court appointed. And so she's known in our family court system to offer therapeutic services for children or people going through divorce or trauma and things like that. So I'm aware of her from that.
How are she and Chris's family doing right now, particularly in light of this news?
Yes, quite frankly, what it's put to me is reignited or renewed the grief for the loss of her brother and her parents' son. They actually had three children, two sons and a daughter. Daughter obviously being Tamara, and then Chris passing, and it was my understanding that her other brother passed too. So Miss McDermott is the last surviving child of that family, and her parents, they're actually elderly. I think in their 80s, early 80s or something like that. And so it has been very difficult on them because they feel like they're reliving the loss of, a son and a brother. They've lost a very incredible person that when you see his videos and his motivational speaking and all of the things that he's overcame, that's just a person we want on this earth, definitely.
Yeah, no, of course, and it's such a tragic situation, and I'm glad you explained a little bit more about what the family's going through. It's heartbreaking, to say the least. And look, I would say, Regina, you've represented a lot of different players in this story and are deeply involved in it.
Yes.
If you can, your conversations with Mica, did Chris Skinner ever come up? I mean, you have the affidavit from Allison Williams talking a little bit more about this. Did Mica ever mention anything about Chris Skinner or what was going on here?
I was thinking about that, and I can't say 100%, but it does seem like it was almost like a brief sentence, not anything that went into depth of it. That was part of it. But in terms of having a relationship and an adulterous affair, that was definitely spoken about. And as far as Mr. Skinner's death, I do recall, hearing that, but I don't recall going into any further, depth about that.
By the way, you mentioned, and I mentioned this before, he seemed to be kind of disillusioned with the church before his death. Was there something other than, of course, this alleged affair? Was there something about the words, the teachings of John Paul Miller that he took issue with?
I don't know anything specific. The family hasn't expressed anything to me specifically, but it's my understanding that it was, I think the words that were used to me were he was pretty much sickened by some of the things that he saw or witnessed. I would say, if you look back at his sermons, in which there were 511 sermons that he posted, and I downloaded them all before he erased them. And when you go there and start going through those messages that were sent, they were coercive type messages to people in the congregation. They were coercive type messages that were meant for Mica. And he also saw some of the disparaging that happened there. It just wasn't what a church should be. And he just didn't want to be a part of it. And he just didn't like what was happening, especially obviously with potentially an adulterous affair with his wife. My goodness, with the quote pastor of the church.
No, of course. Listen, Regina Ward, I always appreciate you taking the time and providing context and insight into these new developments. Please extend our best wishes to Tamara McDermott and her family. I know this is probably a very incredibly difficult time for them, but just again, appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And I will pass along the message.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.